Cool. Oh, evening, everybody. We looks like we all live. I see. Yeah, Simon's already in the comments. Go, Alison. That's a good way to start this.
Oh, thanks.
So I'm going to give a quick introduction to what we're talking about. So first of all, good evening. Thanks everyone for tuning in on a Sunday evening, or if you're listening back, thank you for listening. I hope you're finding it entertaining. So the theme of tonight's conversation is one I've really been looking forward to or getting into, which is the concept of leaderless resistance. So as any of you know who've listened to previous podcasts, what I like to do is to talk about solutions to the vast number of problems we're faced with at the moment. And to me, one of the key ones we've got is a government that's totally out of control and seems effectively hell-bent on implementing totalitarianism. But worse than that, the vast majority of people seem to welcome it with open arms. So when we first saw the clips of China of people getting welded into buildings, I kind of made a comment to the wife that I bet there's politicians in this country are just salivating at the thought of having that kind of power. But thank God it'll never happen here, right? The people would never allow it. And then I think, like everyone else, we've just watched in horror as it did happen here, and the people did absolutely nothing about it. And I think then we've continued to watch in horror as it dragged on for 18 months and onwards. And then besides a few protests, no politicians resigned in disgust. There's been very few public officials that have spoken out. Nobody's been arrested. Judicial reviews have been quashed. It just generally seems like the population are just going to concede to a seemingly unstoppable juggernaut of misery and enslavement, basically. So personally, I think the two problems, parts of the problems we need to solve. The problem is that the problem appears unsolvable and that there's no way for us to resist. I think that's one part of it. And then secondly, that things are not yet bad enough for effectively for the masses to kind of rise up and do something about it. It's just not bad enough for them yet, or we don't have the numbers. Someone then shared a PDF with me that was written decades ago and talked about leaderless resistance as a mechanism to resist a central government that has become tyrannical. I think it was 1960 odds it was written. So I was immediately sold on the idea, and I thought, who better to discuss that with Alison, the Furies, otherwise known as the Furies, although also known as the Furies Returns, and about 7 other aliases on Twitter, thanks to occasional and violent and expletive-laden outbursts. So before we get into it, Alison, do you want to give us an intro into yourself, and then we'll get into it, what it is.
All right. First of all, I apologise if I'm not firing on all cylinders this evening. It's been quite a few days. Nevertheless, listening to what you were saying there, I share this just general malaise with what's going on. I think everybody does that's on Twitter, that's following us both. But I'm also... I've got to a point where I sort of, if I'm going to be brutally honest, I veer between like a quite dark depression over all of this and other things. And this sense that we're just not doing enough to stop something quite sinister from happening that is already, quite a way through happening. And I've felt that way for a long time. So to give you a bit of background, last April I set up a Facebook page which was intended at the time to support Toby Young, I think, on his lockdown skeptics, because I just didn't think that just simply just simply tweeting stuff out, although it was excellent stuff that he was doing, or setting up a website, was going to get to the kind of people we need to get to. I always felt that it needed to reach the Facebook crowd, because these are the gossipy people who use their time to berate other people or share or circulate information that kind of portray people in a certain light during lockdown. If somebody was having an illicit barbecue or something.
Yeah.
And I saw this happening quite a bit on some of the community groups that I was a member of. And I must say, I didn't really use Facebook very often. Certainly from coming from London, I felt that Facebook was on its way out. And it was only when I moved out here into the countryside that I realised that Facebook's still quite popular out here. So I kept it. Otherwise, I would have ditched my account. And I also had family living abroad, so it was kind of an easy way to keep up to date with all of them. So it's not my favourite form of social media. I know everyone hated it, but I just thought the best, there must be people out here who, like me, are feeling quite disgusted at the attitudes that are prevalent on it with regards to how people view what's going on. And I set this thing up and I just didn't think for 1 second it was going to take off. And it did. And I think we got close to about 7,000 people in the end.
Oh, wow.
And I called it Lockdown Skeptics. And I must admit that some of the people that came onto the group, I reserved judgment on some of their opinions, and their opinions mainly circled around this idea that we would end up with vaccine passports, forced vaccines, that Bill Gates was behind it, that there was more to this than, that even I'd thought about, because my primary motivation was the fact that I just felt that the lockdown was authoritarian and wrong. So that's kind of like where I came from on all of this. And I tweeted it out a few times. And yes, you're right. I've had several Twitter accounts, because I do tend to lose my temper quite quickly. And if I'm in one of my dark moods, I will venture into a blue ticks feed and give them a piece of my mind. I can't remember who it was. I think it was Bette Midler who made some inane comment, and I tweeted back at her that she was I think I probably used the C word. I can't remember exactly what I said, but I made a point to her that because I just thought she was being ridiculous, and I can't remember what she was talking about. And that just got me an instant ban. And I didn't learn my lesson the first time, and then subsequently set up several different Twitter accounts, and then each of those got banned in turn. And so here we are. And the name Furies comes from the Greek, the Greek Furies, the three women who were like moral arbiters and sort of would step in and make decisions on morality.
That's interesting. I thought it was just a general state of mind.
Yeah. So, but I tried really hard to sort of set it up like that, but I kept getting booted off every time. So I had to keep coming up with different versions and iterations of the Furies. But yeah, I mean, it was mainly because I get into really dark frame of mind about everything. And sometimes I just, I end up shit posting on Twitter. And I've come to the conclusion more recently that that's just a way, it's just silly and depressing on my part. So I should probably just stop. I don't think I'm bringing anything positive.
I don't think I'm going to counter that. I don't think you need to be positive. I think sometimes just a decent shit post is it's like the release valve. Do you know what I mean? It's like it might be silly and that and whatever, and not achieve anything, but oh god, it feels good sometimes. Just someone.
Yeah, it does. I'll go around and I will pick fights with people, or I'll just, like I'll pick up on something that somebody said and I just can't help myself. I have to call them a stupid twat.
Yeah.
Because they are. But like when we first all started out on Twitter, you used to have some scope for doing that, and it never, you weren't monitored in the same way. Now Twitter is just so pathetic in the way it polices people and marshals people's thoughts that you can't say anything. And if somebody gets upset or takes it personally, they can report you and so on and so forth. So so part of my motivation when I said that on Friday I was going to draw a line under it was also the fact that Twitter just feels like. Here's my thing about Twitter. I get this feeling sometimes that the government's quite happy for us to moan and whine on Twitter, because they know that we're contained, and that the vast majority of the voting population, who sit there and watch Piers Morgan on ITV, on Twitter and couldn't care less about it. And I think they're right in that. And I think that, some of our energy is wasted on it. Coming back to the reason for this whole conversation, I would prefer to see something far more
violent.
I'm
the same. Basically. Like, because I think my dad used to say, like, people only respond to pain. And he was a policeman, so he knew.
Yeah.
So, but it's true though. It's like I kind of share a similar thought to you. It's like what I said before. When I thought that if this happened here, I thought, no way, people are definitely going to take to the streets for this, surely. And it just didn't happen. And I think I think you're right in terms of like, yeah, our attention is on Twitter because we don't have any other avenue. But if you let's just say again, kind of thinking about it, like for me, for example, or you, like if we would go out into the streets and thought, right, we're going to cause some damage, like we're going to take it to them, it's like, well, who's got our back? Nobody. It's like you need to kind of, this is kind of coming from with this leaderless resistance thing, that you need that momentum, because if you go out now and just put a brick through a window or start causing trouble, it's like you're in prison, and then you've not made an impact. Do you know what I mean? It's like you won't even be reported in the
and
news.
you can see that from any of the stuff that's been going on in Australia and also in France. Although they've got they're used to doing violent protests in France, and I don't know. I mean, years ago I studied in France, and I went on an anti-racism demo. Which was organised by this Muslim chap who turned out to be completely corrupt, but as is always the way. But anyway, we went. It was in Paris, and I was kind of at the forefront of this thing, and it got violent. And I'm not going to lie, I absolutely loved it. I was totally game for this thing. And then they called in the French riot police, and these guys turn up in their jackboots and their leather and so on and so forth, and they meant business. And one of them, I just thought, he's never gonna, first of all, I just thought he's not gonna go for me because I'm a girl, so he won't, there's no way he's going to do anything. Because I have to say that this protest have descended into violence, as so many of these things in France do. Cars were being set on fire, that kind of thing. So, or maybe they had just cause to a degree to try and keep a grip on this thing. But I just remember my boyfriend at the time pushing me against a wall and saying, "Knock it the fuck off, because they mean business. They will pound the shit out of you, so stop it." Because he just had no way of controlling me, and I was just like, get out of my way, I don't care, I'm not, and I just carried on. Anyway, one of these officers got me by the scruff of the neck, and I'm not joking, I don't know how, somehow the guys that I was with managed to get me out of this situation. And I do remember my heart pounding at the time, thinking, oh, shit, I've really pushed it here. And he just, we got out of this situation, and he was just like, we spent the whole journey on the train all the way home. I'll never forget that, with him just looking at me open mouth like, bloody hell, who the hell am I going out with? She's a nutter.
But he was going to do what he's told from then on, right?
Oh God, no. But so I've always been, and there've been various other situations in my life where I've always fought my own corner, and I don't care. But I just find it frustrating where we're at the moment, because we've kind of got to a place where we're just talking about this, and we're not doing anything. And I read an interesting statistic the other day that I think it was just 3% of Americans supported armed resistance against the British revolutionary tactics. Just 3%, and 3% ended up being involved in the revolution.
Yeah, I'd actually seen that myself, and I thought that's unbelievable, right? Because when you look back at history and those kind of events, you think, God, the whole country must have been at it, in order to defeat the British.
You get this, because now, of course, that's all you ever hear about from the Americans. They're very proud of that, but it was a tiny minority, and I'm just wondering, where is this tiny minority that will back us up in a fight? Because you've got to a stage now where there's only so much talking you can do. And if everybody is today, and I've scrolled through Twitter, and I just ended up throwing my iPad on the floor just to add to all of my current psyche these last few days. Jesus Christ, that really pissed me off, was this whole idea that everyone is grateful to Boris for not bringing in vaccine passports. A, as if they're not going to bring them in. Are people dumb?
I know.
And B, this sense of gratitude. Oh, thank God. We should be grateful to them all.
No, totally, because it's that cycle, isn't it? It's the kind of the calm and then terror cycle, isn't it? It's like every now and then they'll just turn the pressure down, and as you say, people the response is, "Oh, thank God, thanks, Boris." It's like, no, he's the bad guy.
He threw you a bone.
Yeah, exactly.
First of all, who is he to be throwing any bones in the first place? And secondly, why would you believe him? This time, I don't think it was this time last year. I think it was last July. He came out. This is the same man who came out and said, "We will never lock down again."
That's right.
Are people insane to believe?
I think they are, though. But I think the thing is though, like they are insane. But again, it's that the because if you think about it, I mean, I don't know about you, but like definitely the last couple of weeks, the pressure's been ramping up. The net's been closing. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, it's vaccine passports, it's the booster
It's
jab,
been
and then you see
horrible,
things
and
in
it's
France.
just added to a sense of deep depression about everything at the moment. But
I know it
yeah,
has, because I know. Even I think you're obviously, I'm in Scotland, right? So we've got it still worse. Like everyone's still wearing a mask. We've still got loads of rules. It's compliance central. So at least in England, you're out of that a little bit for a while. But it is that
oh
it
really?
had,
You still? I didn't realise that. Sorry, I had no
yeah. So
idea.
all the mask mandates are still here. They're going to stay. There's still some weird rules about numbers in houses and stuff like that. To a large extent, you wouldn't think anything had actually changed. It's really weird. Like in Edinburgh, I mean, I've driven around a few times, and there's people around, but it's just dead. It's like it's an awful feeling. And like me, I'm like, do you know what? I don't even want to go out, because every time I go out, I'm reminded that the situation we're in. Do you know what I mean? So sometimes I use Twitter as a kind of escape sometimes, because I thought, well, at least I know some like-minded people who are like me, who are completely against it, who would love to get violent because we think that's going to solve the problem. But
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? It's a little bit of escape for me. But yeah, going out it's really depressing. But I agree with it. It's like
it's just like, when you really think about it, these are just ordinary men and women who've been given a little bit of power by the fact that we've voted them in, or we lend them our vote. But these are sub-mediocre people. They're not intelligent. And I just find it incredibly frustrating that we just sit back and just say, yeah, well, we'll just let Boris and all of his mad scientists determine how we live our lives. And people seem willing to accept it. I mean, people outside of Twitter seem willing to just accept that. And they've bought into this. I think to a degree it's worse in America. Some of the stuff I read over there is just like they still genuinely believe this thing is like Ebola or dengue. And that, but I just don't understand how we've got to this point where we're just willing to just let all of these freedoms just go. And I think I actually believe that the only way to resolve it is to turn up outside Parliament and demand that they so I'm trying to word it carefully now, demand that they give up their seats. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's keep this theoretical, but also realistic, right? Because I think that's the only way we're going to get somewhere with this. Because
yes, this is all theory.
In fact, I've got a banner for the occasion, so here we go. This is this is a thought exercise only. Obviously, here's the disclaimer: don't do anything. This is just a complete theoretical exercise we're talking about.
Okay.
But yes, so I'll tell you what we'll do is I've got on the PDF of this Leaderless Resistance, I'm just going to read a couple of key points about it, and then we can pick it apart to see how we could apply it. Because I think it's timeless, right? Because I think it was written, like say, in the 1960s, and actually the reason it was written is effectively to prevent or to resist a communist infiltration of the federal American government, which you can probably argue that's kind of happened already. Whether it's communist or not is kind of irrelevant. They've definitely got a strong federal turning tyrannical government. So it just shows you how timeless it is. So what the way it's sold to you is, and I'll read you some, these are more motivational speeches. So I'll start. So those who love liberty and believe in freedom enough to fight for it are rare today, but within the bosom of every once great nation, there remains secreted the pools of former greatness. And I think that's a good statement, because I think that's what we're kind of saying, right? Is like, we know, like there is a few of us who've connected on Twitter. There's probably more, but again, I think some factors that we've got today that have never been around are like furlough. So I think if furlough ends, to me, that's going to generate, I think, a lot more people with nothing left to lose. Effectively, I think that is the section of society that needs to increase the numbers before things can start like properly happening.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to say, it's not over till the last freedom fighter is buried, imprisoned, or the same happens to those who would destroy their freedom. And I think that would be a perfect T-shirt, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's true, and it's like a lot of the statements, isn't it? It's like there's no freedom or slavery. Pick one, because there isn't really an in between choice here. And then just before it actually goes into the meat of it. It says, the passage of time will make it clear to even the more slow amongst us that the government is the foremost threat to life and the liberty of the folk. The government will no doubt make today's oppressiveness look like grade school work compared to what they've planned in the future. Again, unbelievably prescient. And then, so basically, the most disappointing about it is it's a 7-page PDF. But this is why I wanted to start these conversations, because it doesn't really, it tells you what in theory, what the theory of leaderless resistance is. So basically, it goes on to say what are you resisting, basically, what are you up against in terms of enemy. And again, it's the same as we're up against now. It says that in the pyramid type of organization, so this would be a big government, an infiltrator can destroy anything which is beneath his level of infiltration. So this is vice versa, right? So this is why I think it's similar to the kind of Tommy Robinson effect. Like, he started ETL, then he was just targeted personally. Every time they turned up and organized something, they were just met with overwhelming force. They were disrupted, smeared amongst the press. Do you know what I mean? So basically, that takes that. So that's pointless. And people talk about it today, don't they? Like, oh, we should vote for an MP, or we should start a group. It's like, why? You're not, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, I agree.
And then basically, it says an alternative to that is the cell system. I think you've mentioned this a couple of times before. Like, the cell system is one of the alternatives, which is basically a lot of individual groups like organizing around either a central authority or a central organization that either funds it or organizes or gives out strategy, which again is good. But I think, again, anything you're doing that's going to centralize anything is going to be up for either infiltration, disruption. Do you know what I mean? You can be, especially in this day and age of technology, they're just gonna find it, basically.
And they've got experience, haven't they, through all of the issues that have come about with terrorism over the last few decades from the 70s. They've got the experience and the knowledge, and insofar as how to disrupt that. It's quite tricky.
Definitely. And I think this is another reason why, again, we probably haven't seen more. Because if you think, again, just thought exercise only, if you think, right, you know what, I'm gonna go out tonight and fuck something up, just whatever it is, I'm gonna make something really difficult for someone to do anything, specifically the government. You think, okay, well, as soon as I leave my door, I've got to leave my phone behind because I'm going to be tracked. Then if I happen to stumble on a street that's got CCTV, then I'm screwed unless I effectively cover my face and don't go anywhere and reveal anything about me. But then
it's like that. I don't know if you saw that a few years ago, that TV program where they put somebody on the run and you had to try and hide from.
That's right.
Her Majesty's forces, like MI5, and so they've got all of these. And I used to watch that. I loved that program, and I used to watch that, and I think, no, like every single thing they did, I think, no, you're fucking up there, no, you're fucking up there, and they would thrive on your paranoia, and also the fact that eventually you get so tired, so exhausted, that you start to make monumental mistakes.
And like taking some cash out.
Whereas they've got a whole force of people who are getting enough sleep and who can track you, and they don't have that sort of pressure. But it was fascinating to watch, and I did learn quite a lot.
I know,
if I was ever pushed into that situation. And people talk a lot as well about the fact that as a country we're not armed. What do you think about that?
I think we should be armed. I'm full. I've always been a pro Second Amendment American.
Yeah, but do you think it's detrimental to because in America they even though that they're going through basically communism 101 at the moment. I mean, honestly, it's communism on stilts over there, right? They don't do things by halves, and it's hit America really, really hard. But they still have this advantage. I mean, that's what people say. I don't necessarily think it's a disadvantage. I think there are ways around that.
Yeah, totally. I agree. But what they've with the Second Amendment, they've still got, and this is why communism has taken over there. How it's done through the universities, through the media, through the government, because then they don't need to disarm anyone, because effectively you're molding culture around something completely different than what the founders viewed it. But I think regardless, it's easy to get an image of America of being mostly liberal, but actually when you go there and speak to people, the majority of them just want to be left alone. You know, the kind of the liberty streak runs really deep there. Do you know what I mean? So they're always going to have more people willing to effectively shoot people if you're going to come for the guns or you could come for the family. Do you know what I mean? So the government can get out of hand, and I think obviously it has done, or at least it's showing great signs of doing so. But they know if they wanted to do something similar to what they were going to do here, there's going to be people who will shoot them and just not be worried about it at all, and which is what we don't have, you know, to an extent. As you say, there's ways around it, but obviously we don't have as ready access to that kind of stuff. But they're probably, like I say, there's always a way around things. But no, I think if it came to it here, I think this is why that Second Amendment is there, because at the end of the day, if the government does go nuts, you can effectively, I say, pull 3% of the people together, and you've got a pretty decent chance of. You don't have to defeat the whole government or defeat the whole mechanism. You've just got to be enough of a threat, you know, to try and turn that around.
Yeah.
And going back to something you said earlier, I think the perfect thing would be to go to Parliament. You know, first off, you know, make your intentions clear that, by the way, at some point we're going to go in there and drag these people out. Like,
Yeah,
so you've got a choice.
I do believe that that's kind of like the first thing we should all be doing. And I think it's quite easy to organise something like that on the fly. If you've got like, I was surprised that, you know, with all the millions of people that turned up in these demonstrations recently, and they were pretty impressive. You know, if within that situation somebody very quickly said, right, we're going to head straight towards, even though it wasn't agreed, the route of the protest was obviously pre-agreed. You don't have to stick to that. And if that turns very quickly, I think that sort of overwhelming numbers would have done really well to just rock up outside Parliament and just sort of do this whole we the people thing. That would have been fairly impressive, and just to remind these politicians that they're not there by divine right, that they are there because we allow them to be there. And that continues to be the case. But I just... you know, that there's only so far that these demonstrations or that kind of thing will get you, and I just feel like we need to be leveling up a notch now. And I think what has happened in the last few days is that you know, government has tried to turn the flame down a little bit by coming out with this bullshit about we're not having vaccine passports, and it works. You know, people like, you know, even people that have been getting really quite vocal in the last few months have suddenly turned around and gone, oh, thank God for that, it's all okay now. See, because
Exactly.
And you just think, oh, for fuck's sake, you know, like, so then you lose the momentum that and it's, you know, and that's where it needs to come from. But it is still possible. The trouble is, I think it does somewhat come down to this whole idea of, you know, what are people fundamentally fighting for? Whereas in you know, centuries gone by, a man would leave a family behind, and he was fighting for, you know, against something and for something. So he was fighting for his family, and he was also, you know, fighting against tyranny, which would have been true in the time of the American Revolution. But I don't think it's true now. I don't get this sense that we're also placated with the, you know, like the spoils of socialism. You know, through furlough and God knows what else, that they don't, you know, they don't feel that anything is at stake. And when it is finally at stake, it will be way too late to do anything about it then. So there's that. I mean, I don't personally think that I would have sort of running arguments with a couple of people on Twitter who would say, well, you know, it's pointless because we're not armed. And I think, well, you know, where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah, no, totally.
I don't see that that's the issue. I think the issue is the motivation. And despite the fact that it's, you know, all of these issues are being dangled in front of us, and we've all lived through this ridiculous lockdown that served no real purpose and achieved absolutely nothing. despite all of those liberties being taken away, we're still willing to go along with the government. It's just absurd.
No,
There's
it totally
nothing
is.
that people don't have this sense that there's something to fight for, and I mean specifically men, I'm afraid to say.
No, I'd agree. Then I think I've made this comment a few times. It's been quite interesting to note that even people with platforms who are speaking out are typically women, and it's been quite an interesting thing to watch. Like Bev Turner springs to mind, Denise Welch before that. Do you know what I mean? There's actually very few men with platforms speaking out. I'm thinking this is a curious one. But I think you bang on. And I was listening to the panel on the difficult second album, the kind of the female panel, and it was really interesting because you got it spot on in terms of like, men are confused about their role in society and stuff like that. And I think that's a big part of it, because it's like, well, what do we do? I think there's, and that also the
well, you're just clobbered over the
infantilization.
head. You're clobbered over this whole expression, toxic masculinity. It just completely rips men to shreds. It implies that nothing of their essence, of their being, is valid or valuable or treasured at all, whereas women are revered, like they're the mothers, and they're the and so on and so forth, and they can't do anything wrong. Men have had this like thrown at them now for so long, that I think that there's a sense of confusion. Like, are you defenders? Are you breadwinners? What are you? What's your role? And I think that has contributed to where we are now, and it's going to be a major factor in preventing anything from happening in the sense of what we're talking about, unless that sort of gets turned around, really. And men understand that there is everything at stake. I mean, right up until the Second World War, maybe somewhat thereafter, there was a clear role, and nobody took it for granted either, I don't think. Whereas now it's just like, well, no, you can't be that, and every aspect of your masculinity is toxic, because all that stands between us and evil is, like, there are men who are prepared to do violence, if you like, but we've taken that away and said, no, that's not valid anymore, and nothing that you do is valid, and that frustrates me greatly. I mean, I grew up with a father who was quite conservative and a mum who was very, very much a feminist, and saw both sides of the argument, and and for a long time, and this may surprise a few people, but for a long time I was quite, especially as I went through university, I was quite the feminist, and I would like really fight tooth and nail for that corner, and then eventually realised it was all bullshit, and actually realised it contributed in part to the way my life fell apart, or in great part to that. And I think that runs through society as a whole. It's been very destructive, and it is now fundamentally a part of why we're in this situation where we're in. We don't know if there's anybody who's going to, where our 3%, if you like, of the revolutionaries are going to come from.
I think the 3% are going to come from the Gen X. I genuinely believe that, because I think in terms of so the Gen X generation, or probably we're just on the cusp of before that kind of mindset really kicked in. So we were exposed to it, but actually we're still kind of fundamentally from that era, the kind of the more conservative, that role era, and then we don't kind of buy into this. I think it has kind of seeped in, I think, but generations after that, I think I agree with you. I think I've bought into that narrative, or has had it forced on them. So I think Gen X are going to save the day. But if we only 3%, I must admit, when I heard that 3%, I was like, right, that's really interesting. That makes me feel a little bit better.
I think it was on Twitter. I don't know if we were following the same person or somebody retweeted it, but I'd kind of got that sense anyway, because there were I learned that the first social housing in London came about through, I think it was through a chap called Peabody, I've forgotten his first name, who was an American entrepreneur who lived in the country during just around the time of the revolution, And in reading about him and about the circumstances, I could see that there wasn't that there was a great deal of stuff that went on between the colonies and Britain that was productive and successful, and that a lot of people didn't want to see that end. So there were I was surprised to learn at how many people that were opposed to the revolution on that basis. And saw that everything that happened, the transactions were reciprocal, and that there was a peaceful way through it. I don't know enough about my history now really to be able to comment on how it kind of how everything turned on its head. But there was a great deal of pamphleteering and chatter about liberties and life, liberty, and the Edmund Burkes and all the rest of it. And all of this stuff was going on, and if you like, we're the Twitter is like where the pamphleteers are.
Yeah.
But so that all of that's happening. So I wonder in my head if something is actually going to be the trigger, the catalyst to move us on to the next stage. But then I kind of think, I get carried away and I think, yeah, it's possible. But then I think, actually, no, it's not, because men have been so reduced by what's been going on the last few decades with feminism and so on, that we just don't have those revolutionaries. They're just not there.
I think
so
they are.
I'm kind of hoping that's not true.
I'm going to give you some. Well, I can't give you any evidence of hope, but I'm still hopeful that will occur, or that's kind of will come to pass. I think the conditions aren't quite right yet, because I don't think that enough, I don't think enough people are affected by what's going on. I think the furlough was the key thing. So that was effectively an anti-riot tax.
They really mute, so using furlough and all the mechanisms of socialism is great at blunting anything, really, isn't it?
It is, because if you think about it, if you were a lot of people were running a business, effectively were told, right, I'm going to pay you 80% of what your income was, and you're just going to sit at home watching Netflix effectively. And so, to be honest, I can understand why a lot of people will be like, okay, well, do my principles outweigh the need to to get that money and just sit tight? And I think a lot of people just thought, do you know what? But they may have just seen it as a kind of temporary exercise. They maybe haven't joined the dots, or wanted to join the dots, about what the bigger play was, and they just thought, you know what, sorry, I'll just ride it out. So I think allegedly furlough, I don't know, is that going to? I thought it was supposed to due to finish in September, but I don't know.
I was wondering that, because I think it's supposed to end. This is what I've heard from. Because within the industry that I'm working in at the moment, there's just been this massive shortfall of staff. Everyone in hospitality is struggling to get staff, and chefs and goodness knows who. It's really, really bad. So you've got pubs that can't open because they don't have enough. Even where I am, there's a couple of pubs that are now shut on days which would normally mean big business for them, because they can't get the staff. I've had people stream into my cafe and say, oh, well, we're here because we wanted a drink in the posh place up the road, but they just, we've been waiting forever and ever and ever to get served, and we're fed up, so we're in here. And I'm like, okay, well, come on in. But even I'm exhausted. I'm not going to lie. I'm absolutely shredded, because I expected by now to have some help and somebody working with me, and it's just not working out. And I'm just wondering how I can keep up this pace 6 days a week. I can't. But there's all of this is going on. And when I ask people, what's the reason? It's like, well, so many chefs, they coasted through the lockdowns on furlough, and the second it was over, decided, well, actually, this industry is kind of like on its knees, and I don't really want to be doing this anymore. And I've got my nice furlough bonus, so I'm going to go off and do something else. So that it's just falling apart as a result of furlough. But I gather that it's kind of continuing until at least the end of the month, and then they'll probably renew it. God knows where they get the money for this. But for as long as that's happening, people seem quite happy with lockdown. I mean, when I spoke to some of the businesses at the beginning of lockdown last year, and I was walking around asking some of them, like florists and hairdressers, they were all shitting themselves about it. Like, oh my God, I've still got like a rent to pay, and I've still got staff to pay. How, if I don't have the revenue, what's going to happen? several months later, I see these people coasting around, walking their dogs, having a nice long holiday.
Yep.
They look fairly unfazed and unbothered. They're living their best lives. Thanks very
Yeah.
much. So,
I know.
so when you've got that kind of going on, that you're not really going to get the kind of motivation that you need to get people angry enough. And I don't think they can stop the furlough now. So if there's another lockdown in October, as they keep threatening, presumably they'll extend the furlough.
I think so, yeah. But I think within that, though, right? So what I thought was quite interesting recently is when they would propose changes to some sort of, I don't follow football, right? So I'm going to probably make a bodge of this. When they changed to proposing to make some changes to the European Champion League or something, and there was an absolute uproar. I'm thinking, right, we need that energy over here. It's that, because and it was mostly guys, which I thought was, okay, well, that's not really that surprising. But I thought, okay, well, whatever energy that they've currently got and why they feel so pissed off that something was changing to their football, we need the energy over here. So I think some of that 3% could potentially come from that group, but you've just got to get rid of that money. That furlough has got to go. Do you know what I mean? Because someone needs to be sitting there, like that woman was saying right at the start, like, holy shit, how do I pay the bills?
Yeah.
And then see
that's
what they need
what's needed. Yeah.
Yeah, but then they need to find, and this is another part of the solution here, is they need to find people like us who will actually either have something ready or be able to talk to them saying, look, do you know this wasn't about a virus, right? And then actually gently, not kind of give them the crazy stuff straight away, like gently ease them into, they didn't even need to do the lockdown. There's a financial collapse going on behind the scenes, and this was a cover for. Do you know what I mean? They're printing money left, right, and center, and they're taking money.
Yeah, it's really that's the really difficult bit to get across, because I know that people were talking about this on the Facebook group a year ago, and I thought, okay, that's a bit nuts, and I was kind of like ignoring it. But it's taken me however many months, but I've kind of now I can see whether I've gone down the rabbit hole, as James Delingpole would say, or red pill, black pill, whatever. I now see it for what it is, but it's going to be a very tough sell with your ITV, Piers Morgan, Breakfast TV watching people to try and get that message across to them. Very few people will get it. Can you just hang on 1 second so I can hear a small child in the background, and I just need to go and resolve that. Hang on.
Sure, no problems at all. Just while we're doing that, I'm going to call up some comments. So, Flora, people are lazy. The government want to make decisions for them as long as they're getting their bread in circuses. And I totally agree. I think that is part of the distraction technique. And I think the furlough was the financial element to that. It's like, here your money, go and shut up. And then, as you know, like popular culture, the crap on television, the football, it's like they just could placate you, and people just zone out and they don't think about anything else. And that's what they start valuing in life. So I totally agree. But that's kind of what I'm getting at. It's like, if we can, it needs to get so bad that those things are just not there. There's no comfort blankets whatsoever. And they're literally then faced with, well, what do I do? What can I do here? Who's to blame? And I think this is where the government rely on them being told, well, it's not us to blame. It's either the unvaxxed or people are not towing the line or something. They'll just divert them. This is why we need to be almost kind to these people and say, okay, well, we understand, you're now at this position, you're now wondering, you've got all these questions, here's some of the answers for you, and then just put them on that path. And hopefully we could get some people out of that group who would be effectively willing to say, you know what, I'm angry now that they've effectively lost everything and it could have been avoided, or it's nothing to do with them, it's nothing to do with the unvaxxed or whatever, and then start taking the fight to them. And what else have we got? And then Graham, agree. Yeah, and I think this is another massive problem we've got that we need. I don't think, and we can't solve this overnight. And again, I know I like to focus on solutions, but if you think about how long we've taken from being in a place where people were responsible for themselves because either there was no state backing or whatever, then they've kind of increased the kind of state involvement in people's life and just gently removed it over time to the point where we are now, where the government it's huge. It's like, and this really makes me mad as well when you speak to people. It's like, oh, the government should do this, government should do that. It's like, well, why don't you do that? Why don't you do it for yourself? So I think we are like, it's like culture wise, we're probably like at least 40 years behind that. They've had 40 years of kind of doing this. So I think I agree with it. It's like it seems a bit bleak, but we almost need something like a collapse that immediately removes all of that comfort blanket, says, right, you're on your own now, chaps.
Yeah,
You've got to.
sorry, I'm back now. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think maybe just bring it on, let it happen. Let's watch this collapse, and maybe if the world starts burning all around us, people will finally realise, well, they will have no choice.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, then it's it's quite different, and I'll be there. I'll be at the front, quite happily. I'll be returned to Paris in the 90s.
It was quite funny, right? Because when I had the podcast with Sedan of Sea, I think because I've never really spoken to him before that, and I think he was a bit taken aback when I was kept on about violence, because I was telling him about my story, like when I was young and kind of getting bullied at school, and then just learning how violence could solve problems in a really quick and easy way, and they kind of then use that in kind of sports and playing rugby and on and on and on. I mean, not in a kind of predatory way, but in a self-defense way. Like the most maximum amount of violence can solve a problem extremely quickly. And I think sometimes that's the situation calls for it, and then you can all just get on with your lives. So I agree. I think if something came down, if we sent a message like that, I think this would be over pretty quick. I think if we would need to do something. I'm saying something really serious, or at least show intent and say, even if this was like, I think someone mentioned this a while back, I thought this was a really good idea. It's like almost like a silent protest is probably more sinister than anything. And like you said, if you imagine if like everybody just stopped outside Parliament and just didn't budge, but didn't say anything. Do you know what I mean? And then you just hand someone a card and say, by the way.
Yeah, that silent sort of threat. There's just this reminder that we are many and they are few, and that they are not something special. They don't have some divine right to govern us. I don't give two shits about any of these people. Who are they? I used to see Boris trundle past me on his sodding bike when I was standing there waiting for the bus in Bloomsbury every single day, and he'd say, "Oh, morning," and I'd just look at him and think, "God, I hate you." And and even then I disliked him. I didn't vote for the man. I knew he'd be a waste of space. I knew he was a total disaster. He can talk a good talk, but I knew he was a disaster. And I knew that he was a disaster when my boss, a woman who was a massive Obama fan and gosh, so progressive, so sort of not progressive, I use that term loosely, so left wing, as to be, beyond nauseating. And she went to some business thing in London, and he was there, and she came back and she was like, "Oh, Alison, I think Boris is such a great guy." And she went on and on about him. And I thought, right, I knew he was a piece of shit. And if she's saying that he's great, then he is absolutely not great. She just bought into all of that, and I thought, oh God, here we go. And I just never had any faith in him whatsoever. He's just a Burke. And he also, plays on this whole, persona, this bumbling, lovable oaf kind of thing. But, he's nobody. They're all nobodies. They are less than mediocre, and we allow them to run roughshod over our lives. And they really genuinely do. To go back to the original point of all of this, they need to be reminded that they are nobodies. Steve Baker's another one who I just, can't
don't get me
abide.
started on that wet blanket.
God. Mr. like crocodile tears in Parliament and so on and so forth, and he does nothing. The best he can do is come out with "Write to your MP." Similarly, right. Peter Hitchens will go on and on and on and on, and say, make some salient points. But then when you actually push him and say, "Okay, Peter, so what should we do?" "Oh, write to your MP."
I know. It's so lame. And I think someone mentioned this a while back. I thought this was another good idea. In fact, it was only the last week or something. It's like, we should be turning up at these people's homes, because I think they were doing that in Australia, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think they were just going to like one governor or something in Australia. I thought, no, let's do it. Let's show them that they're never going to be alone. And I think, again, in terms of this, these tactics we can have, you don't necessarily need to organize something like that in a long time. That could be 10, 20, 100 of you could do that quite quickly. Say, right, by the way, here's the address, turn up an hour. You know what I mean? And then everyone goes there and just stands there, just to remind them everywhere they go. It's like, actually, no, you can't just go to Parliament and that's where you do your deeds, and then all of a sudden you're a free man and can do whatever you like in society. Actually, no, what you're doing has got consequences. You're affecting millions of people with these idiot decisions that you're making. And I think, let's show them, like, you're never going to be able to live this down. Just some things like banning them from every public house and land. Great, that's one tactic. Let's do it.
Yeah, I mean,
Let's make them pariahs.
I mean, if my local MP ever turned up to my place of work, I'd quite happily show him the door. I really genuinely do think that we need to start thinking beyond Twitter and not get so caught up in it all the time. Because yes, it is great for shit posting, and I'm God, do I indulge in that? And it can be a way to vent and let off steam, and get some information. But at the same time, I think the more time we spend on there just talking, the less time we are likely to do something proactive that really genuinely could turn things around. And I worry now with today's news that we're going to have a major problem in convincing people further that we still need to keep the pressure on, because they seem to really have bought into this idea that we're not going to have vaccine passports or be locked down.
Yeah, we need to give them something, because just what Simon said there on screen, it is the in real life networks that needed to start. It's this localism. I know this is something I briefly touched with like Mike and Sean on a previous podcast. It's and Dan as well. We do need to move to more of that local networks idea, because, and again, this is similar to what the Leaderless Resistance is about, and what they refer to as the fan.
What do you mean? What's an IRL network? Sorry.
In real life, just basically like people in your local area. So you could have like 10 to 15 people that that you could support or seek support from, and not just necessarily for kind of rebellion type exercises, but just generally for support, speaking to people, helping.
I think that has actually, I mean, I think that's come about through this through the Third Wednesday setup, which I think is quite it's a brilliant thing. It's a brilliant idea, and I think that's definitely come about. And then beyond that, I don't know.
Well, because one thing they're going to do, or I'm pretty sure they will do at some point, is just black out like Twitter or social media network. They'll just black them out, because they'll know that that's where a lot of things get organized. So they'll rely on the fact that people are on Twitter and they can connect to anyone in the world and organize, and they'll just black it out. They'll just go, and then I think it's down to, okay, then what do we do? So like real networks is one thing, but then what we need, one missing thing that we need, again, as part of this leaderless resistance, is something like rules for radicals. So the left have got this, I can't remember the guy's name now, it escapes me. Whoever wrote that book wrote a book that basically says, here are the rules for radicals, and it's not about turning the tables, like some basic tactics. How do you win? How do you turn the arguments against your enemy? All that kind of stuff. And it was very explicit, but that wasn't. As soon as he wrote that book and it was distributed, then it was a template for people to act, and that's what we need. We don't have that. We've got like too many people who wanting to be nice, like Douglas Murray and all these other intellectuals who make, I'm going to make these nice statements, and we need to not sink to their levels. It's like, no, fuck them. Right, we're beyond that now. It's like
that's exactly
the fight has come to us. Yeah,
that's exactly. And there's too many people out there. There's too many talking heads, if you like, who are more interested in how to frame this in such a way as to get retweets and likes than whether or not what they're saying is truly meaningful. We need to move it beyond this now. I'm sick to death of everybody trying to say the same thing in the nicest way, in the coolest way possible, to get the kind of energy behind their Twitter accounts that they want, or the clicks and all the rest of it to their articles. Okay, what more needs to be said?
Yeah.
Because we need, can we now move this on a level? We need a leader of some kind who's prepared to really go the extra mile. And I mean, looking at somebody like Loza Fox, he's been pretty cool in some of the things that he's done. He's been fairly fearless. But I'm not at that point where I think that yet another set of political parties is going to save us. Politics needs to be upended. The whole thing needs to be turned on its head, stripped of everything. There needs to be a total restart, because we're not going to get anywhere by just having a set of political parties who might be able to give Boris Johnson a bit of a scare in the polls. Because we're just continuing the status quo. The whole thing just needs to be smashed to smithereens.
I totally agree with it. And I think the only problem with Laws of Fox and stuff like, he's been saying some good things, but again, it's just words. It's like, and I don't think even we don't need a new political party. I totally agree with what you said. The whole system is corrupt. You could elect an entire party of Laws of Foxes, and you'd still get nowhere because they've still got the civil service who do everything anyway. You've still got the lords, you've still got the local councils, and this is why I kind of hate to say it, that there is a long road ahead of us. Like, if we want to upend it, there's two ways it can happen. It could come down completely because there's some sort of violent revolution, or we could turn it on its head and do that thing. So actually, no, let's start with the ground up. Let's start getting the councils out. But this is kind of coming where it comes down to this kind of reluctance for people to do something because they've become comfortable with the government making the decisions for them or doing stuff for them. We like the councils to come and take the bins away. We like the council to do this. But that's the problem. We need to get to stop people thinking that, and I say, no, get involved in your local community and get rid of the government, because the only reason they're there is because you're not doing something. You know what I mean? So it's a difficult mindset to change people into, to say, actually, no, you're going to take more responsibility for your life, either because they're not there anymore, or the problem is so obvious to them that they think, oh shit, we need to get our act together. Let's actually start organizing our own little community services, and then let's start taking the fight back to them. Let's just get rid of the councils.
Yeah, and getting rid of the councils is I think that's a really good point, because I've got a suspicion that what's going to happen over the next few weeks is that Boris is going to try and disentangle himself from all of this Coronavirus Act by saying that they're going to, it's no longer going to come from central government. They're going to devolve all of the decisions down to local councils. I can't think of anything worse. The kind of people that get involved in local councils kill me now. Oh my God, they're even worse. These little busybodies that have achieved nothing in life, and so that their only outlet is to go into local politics. It's like, oh my God, fuck, really? They're going to be making these decisions, and I'm convinced that that's how it's going to go. How he's going to get himself out of this situation with the, now he knows that it's unpopular, this act.
No, totally, and I agree with it. The people who want to have that authority are the last people who should have it. It's
my God, they're awful. They're the people that stick road humps, for God's sake, and come up with these stupid decisions about with these little temporary traffic lights. It's like, oh God, no, please God, no.
No, I totally agree.
Like,
but
it's getting rid of that layer of government, and making people understand that. That's not democracy. I'm sorry, but it's not. And that's all. I mean, that's a big discussion for maybe something else, another podcast. But this whole idea that we're living in a democracy is such a crock.
Oh no, it's bullshit. I think it's the comfort. Again, it's that comfort that whenever you tick that box, something's going to happen. But again, it's that outsourcing, right? People are very used to outsourcing things. Like, here's my responsibility. I'm going to tick a box, and I'm trusting you to go and do something. But I think one thing the kind of lockdown has done is it's just shown us how bad, this is almost a culmination of a string of bad decisions that we've let happen effectively. Like, we've gone along with this. Okay, I'll tick the box. I'll vote for him, and then not think about it. And then you complain because they don't do something. Well, this is now the fullest extension of that problem.
Yeah, we don't bother to vote at all. I mean, actually, one of the things I was quite impressed with once when I saw a ballot paper in America, a friend of mine, I can't remember, it was a whole bunch of elections, the sheer number of people that they have to vote on or vote in over everything from police to goodness knows what. But also there's a level of engagement there that's seemed to be a lot stronger than it is over here. They seem to know who these people were, and it mattered to them who they were voting for. Whereas I've gone along, I'm not going to lie, sometimes to these local elections, and I'm faced with like a string of people that I should be voting for, and I think, who the bloody hell are these people? And I'm you know, searching around for information. I've got no clue, and I've lazily ticked the box next to, you know, the Conservative, even though he's probably, or she's probably, utterly useless. And I'm not even aware that, you know, these people, I was supposed to be, I'd gone along to vote for something that I thought was one thing, and it turns into, you know, a whole load of other people I should be voting for. And I think, well, hang on a second, you know, who are they? And we've become quite lazy with it all and just let it, well, I have. I mean, maybe other people are better than me, but I just think, well, this is a sham. It's ridiculous. And we're just voting, you know, we're just recycling this whole system. The whole thing needs to just have the rug pulled from under it. And the only way to do that is, I still believe the only way to do that is to just get really arsey with it, a bit violent.
No, again, you found common ground here, because I agree, and I think it's only when you do that they think, oh shit, I'm not. They don't want to deal with anything like this. They rely on people being kind of placid and, oh, okay, I'll just let you get on with it. It's like, all you got to do is turn around and say fuck off, and say it with enough force. Like, okay, I can't be bothered. This is, just let him deal with it. Do you know what I mean? And then if enough of people turn around and just say no, just get lost, like just get out of my business. That's what we need. So it's, again, the problem is that's quite a long timeline, and I think the problem's here now. And I think if we don't do something pretty fast, because I know, like, say, touching on the black pill a little bit here, the financial system is rapidly like deteriorating, and then I think, well, estimates vary, but it can be anywhere from the next year to the next 10 years that they won't have a choice. It's just going to be so bad. You're going to end up with hyperinflation, and you're going to end up in the same problem as Germany. And it's just maths. There's nothing. There doesn't need to be a sinister plot behind it. It's just maths. That's what's going to happen. But the problem is, if that does happen, we're not going to have a say in what those solutions look like at all. Which is why I think having that idea of local networks is spot on, because what that would actually do is, it might not be the solution that you have that can fix everything right now, but over time you can build that up and just stop building those local networks, and then that becomes eventually the resistance enough to turn around and say no. Do you know what I mean? It's like, if we let this happen,
and if they do sort of devolve all these powers to local councils, actually, that some of those local network ideas, I think, would become even more important in many ways. So it's an interesting view. I mean, when you think about it, though, I suppose one of my biggest issues is that I kind of want everything to happen now. I want resolution. I'm impatient, and I need to know exactly where I stand. I need to know exactly how the land lies. I need to know, I need to know that something is going to happen if it's supposed to happen. And I just get the sense that some of these things that we're talking about will take years, decades to change. I mean, in the same way that the left spent decades infiltrating business and government to the extent that they have, that they changed the culture and they've influenced the way people think and, the way companies run. And whereas, years ago, you could rely on business being conservative and right wing, if you like, and the state just being, where the lefties lived. Now it's, they're across the board, and it's very, very hard. So there's some of these local networks that we're talking about. We're gonna have to start thinking long-term culture change. So parking the violence side of things, we're going to have to think about how we infiltrate schools and business and recolonize all of those a little bit, so that the culture, we can influence the culture in the way that they've done over decades. And my heart sinks when I think about that, because I think, okay, that's absolutely needs to happen, but it's not going to happen in my lifetime. And whereas I'm prepared to do my bit to make it happen for future generations, I just feel depressed about the whole shit show just, lasting decades. And so that's why I think my mind just turns to the more immediate resolution of all of that, which is armed insurrection.
Yeah, well, but I think you could possibly achieve a blend, right? Because if you think
Yeah,
about it in terms of what is the most urgent problem, the most urgent problem is we're facing an onslaught at the moment from effectively totalitarian forces. So what we've actually seen and what a lot of people have seen now is that voting Conservative or Labour makes no difference. And one thing that really grinds my gears is like, oh, Labour would have been worse. It's like, no, you're missing the point. Like, we deserve better than all of them. And what it's revealed is they're actually all the same. They're just puppets
yeah.
marching to a kind of a different, like a tune that's been played by a higher authority. That's where we need to start focusing our attention. Is like, well, hang on a minute. I'm not. Why don't we, as a kind of culture, start taking interest in these people? You know, just forget the divisions, forget the Labour versus Conservative, Lib Dem, all that kind of stuff. Let's start focusing our attentions on those kind of bigger players and say, maybe we should start like making them feeling a bit uncomfortable. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's something that, because that's where the onslaught is coming from, in my opinion. It's like, you know, all the kind of financial vested interests, the big corporatism type interests, they're the ones who are calling the shots. So let's take it to them now, because that's where the threat is coming from.
Yeah.
And then you have that turnaround, because all you've got to do is kill that threat now, because that is the immediate one. And then the culture one, there's no way around that, unless you have unless that class just fucks off in a spaceship, which would be awesome, right? Because if they just went blast off in space and we never saw them again and left us all to it, do you know, we'd actually have a pretty good time. I think it was like, oh, hang on a minute, we can do this. There'd be a bit of turmoil, but yeah, people would just naturally go to that local instinct, because that's the only thing that would work, you know, potentially. So I like that scenario, but probably chances of that happening
I
quite
did
slim.
read the other day that there's an island for sale off the coast of Scotland somewhere, and it's not very expensive. Maybe we should just club together and buy it and go live on it. And
Well,
it's a private island, so maybe we can, yeah. But I did look at it, and it looked a bit rocky and bleak.
yeah, it is bleak, unfortunately. But at the end, and doing worry, and I was, especially during lockdown, I was kind of like going off grid. I've always wanted to do something like that anyway, or have somewhere remote. I've always wanted it, but then when the lockdown started, like, oh no, I'm starting to need this now. It's more of a want. It's not a want. It's a need. But then I'm thinking, well, if you go off grid, at some point the grid is going to expand and then start getting interested in you, and then you're screwed. So you may as well focus your attention on like just trying to destroy the grid, or do what you can. Like, you don't need to be, and I think a lot of people get dragged down with this mentally as well. It's like, you don't need to be a hero. You don't need to be leading the charge or be the person that does something that, you know, that everyone recognizes. You just need to be a tiny part of the big plan, and you've won.
Well,
You know what I mean?
there were plenty of people during the last few lockdowns who stood their ground. There were a couple of cafes, hairdressing salons, shops, and so on, and these people kind of defied the law and stayed open, and they got various visits from authorities. And I think what needs to then happen with if we do this again, which I assume we're going to with another lockdown, when these people stand their ground and they say, no, I'm not going to be shut down, then these little local networks need to get behind these cafes, restaurants, pubs, and salons. And it was quite interesting, because I've had quite a few people turn up at my place recently who say, oh, well, we heard about you through this network or that network, and they're all on Telegram, and you need to join this, and this is where we discuss stuff. And I've had a lady come and apply for a job recently there, and so that's kind of reassuring, because they've come along several times to support me. And I think, okay, so if we have another lockdown and I make the decision not to close, which means therefore I would forfeit any grants that I could get and so on and so forth. So I'm going to be in deep shit if I do that. Then are these little local networks going to have my back? And the same would be true of any business that decides to try and stay open and to try and push back. We've got to have some kind of system in place whereby they know that, like if the police are going to come Australian style and drag me kicking and screaming from my place, then I need to know that I've got people who are prepared to defend me, because I won't go down without a fight, and I will milk it for all the PR that I can get.
But I will
be portrayed as this absolute mad, screaming, sweary
Banshee.
woman,
Yeah.
who, you know, like kept calling all the local officers cunts and so on and so forth. But, you know, so I
Yeah.
won't come, you know, so I need to know that, you know, so if I'm left there hanging on my own, I'm going to look like an idiot. But if I know that, you know, there are people there who are prepared to come along, and some of these people are really well versed in the law, in common law, and are able to quote this at various people who've turned up at their doors and just, you know, really turn the tables on them. But I'm not one of those people, and not many people are. So, but just to know that that was, you know, that network of support was there would, I think, make a big difference to any potential lockdowns that might be coming down the line.
Do you know, I was quite surprised it didn't happen as well. Is like some sort of like general fighting fund of money. So see all the money like they were giving to like Simon
Yes.
Dolan and a few other places. I was thinking, well, we need someone, and this may be where like someone like who's more publicly recognizable, like James Delingpole or something, could probably step in and set up like either a GoFundMe or something that couldn't be cancelled to
I
say,
agree. I think that's a really good. I said that
yeah,
actually ages ago. I think that's a really important thing, because again, knowing that you've got somebody who's going to fight, because the more people that do it, the more the courts get clogged up to the extent
exactly.
that they cannot possibly process all of these people, and eventually all these cases, you know, will fall foul of certain pieces of law and get dropped. But you're still under that pressure and that stress, and you're still, you know, you still got no revenue stream, and you're you know, you're not going to get the grants that they will shell out to people. So to have that sort of funding as well, to have that sort of backup is going to be massively important. I think it would be a very useful thing to do.
No, totally. And even just not even just as well as like being a financial backing for you as well, or for your business, like in terms of like legal fees as well as that. Do you know what I mean? So literally
Yeah,
everybody
yeah.
who made a stand and could actually say, do you know what, find me, do whatever you want. I'm not shutting. Do you know what I mean? And then
Yeah, I
actually
think
that money can also
somebody,
go for
yeah,
lawyers.
yeah, somebody did try to set up a network of businesses that were prepared to stay open in the last lockdown, so that sort of started, and then everybody sort of went, oh, well, there weren't that many really, were there? And I'm thinking, yeah, but these people are doing something at a huge risk to themselves. If you
Yep.
then turned around and said, well, actually, here's this network, here's a group of lawyers who will support you, in the same way that the Christian lawyers support people who fall foul of the various legislation that's come in, and where they're not allowed to, you know, like if they didn't bake a cake for a gay couple, that kind of thing, because of their Christian values. You know, the solicitors are there and will fund free of charge, you know, fund their legal fees and all the rest of it. That would be a massive. That would, I think, could potentially turn things on its head. As long as you've got that, and you've got like a group of men who are prepared to make sure that I don't get dragged away
Yeah,
to
totally.
prison,
Yeah.
that would be nice. You know, like, so that would be good.
And you
And
could
you
do
can just
both, like
call on these people. Yeah.
exactly, because I mean, again, it's knowing, again, it's that whole it's not motivation, it's momentum, right? So it's like I was saying before, it's like at the moment or during lockdown one, there was no momentum whatsoever. There wasn't enough people who were suffering, you know, in order to say, "Do you know what, fuck it, I've got nothing else left to lose.
No,
I'm going to start causing
we were all
trouble."
outside clapping the NHS like seals and all of
Yeah,
that stuff.
totally.
So yeah.
But actually, if you turn that around now and kind of started doing something like that, and actually you might find people got drawn into it who maybe were maybe on the fence last time, who might think, "Oh, do you know what? Yeah, this is the right thing to do. Do you know what? I'm going to chip in 20 quid to this fund," or, "Do you know what? I know a lawyer who would do this," or, "Do you know what? I live in the vicinity. Alison's getting carted off. Let's get let's get around there and
Yeah, I'll
cause,
send you a
you
quick
know what I mean?"
text message, and you know, these people who turn up at my place for coffees once in a while, and they, you know, they look like really good guys to me. You know, they'd be prepared to stand up and say, no, you're not having her.
Yeah,
That would be
exactly.
great. That would be great. And to know that the legal fees are, you know, like partly covered. I mean, there was a guy, I can't remember, I think it was up in Manchester actually, who refused to close his cafe and got reported by various idiotic ex-customers, and he ended up in a running battle with these prats outside his shop. And I watched this being circulated on Twitter, and it was infuriating because I'm thinking, like, he was physically fighting these guys off, and I thought, are you all going to just stand around and film him, or is anyone going to jump in and try and help him? Because it was really painful to watch, and I was so incensed. I looked up the cafe afterwards. I think the guy was Polish, and I looked it up, found the telephone number, and left several quite emotional messages on his voice machine saying, "I'm so sorry. If I'd been there, that would never have happened to you," because I was so furious. So that kind of thing, like when somebody really, puts their neck on the block, then they need to be able to know that there are a group of people who's going to turn up and help them, and that is the start of little cells of insurrection, if you like. So that is one route.
Yeah, definitely. And this whole idea of cells, and actually I'm going to use one of the terms from the document, which was the phantom cell, or the phantom cell mode of organization. And this is pretty much that. It's like there is no leader. There's no group you can attack. There's nothing to infiltrate because you effectively won't see them coming. It'll just happen on you. You'll just feel them at some point when you don't want to. And it wouldn't take many things like that to turn it around. Like just in that situation, right? If there was like one person getting dragged away or the business having been interrupted, just one event where he hits a button and all of a sudden 12, 20, 30 people show up. And actually, they've been able to call that in, that they didn't know it was going to happen, but all of a sudden they were met by overwhelming resistance.
Yes.
And if they knew, shit, every single time this happens, this keeps happening, it's not going to take long for that to crumble, because they'll just not want to do it. They'll be like, oh God, we're going to have to shut a cafe down there. Let's just move on. Let's just go and do something else. It wouldn't actually take long. So that whole
because and you can see again, watching the videos of these various busybodies who and police officers, usually women, who turn up at these premises, and some of these guys, as I say, were very well versed in their rights, and kind of made it completely, completely drain the life out of these people, so that by they just, in the end, they sort of wander off looking a bit dejected and think, oh well, we'll try again next time, and we'll keep trying until we wear you down. But this guy, I'm thinking of this chap in Bristol now who ran a tattoo parlor, that he just kept going. He was always there, and always knew his rights and the law, managed to prevent these people from doing anything physical, like dragging him away. I mean, I don't know whether or not Australia is sort of the warning, if you like, as to what's to come over this winter, whether or not we are going to go from a few busies turning up and saying, oh, don't do that, you should be closed, to literally dragging people out and sticking them in quarantine centres. Part of me hopes that is going to be the case, that we are going to go down the Australia. I really hope that we do, because then that just gives me all the motivation I need.
No, I totally agree, and I agree with it. That's kind of, it's very black pill, but no, bring it on, because people need to see it. Do you know what I mean? People need to actually, they're ignoring it, and it's not going away. So let them see it, And yeah, I agree with it.
I'm really surprised at Australia, because I always had them down as like hard. So I'm surprised that they've just kind of keeled over and just let their, thuggish police be as brutal as they have been, and not done too much about it. I'm really surprised at that. But if that's what's coming, bring it on, I say.
Yeah, but saying that, I still think there's an element of obviously media manipulation, right? Because the media will only want you to see these extreme things. So you when you view something like that, or you see things on Twitter, it's like you've just seen a very tiny, tiny slice of just a few people acting that way, and maybe that's what you were meant to see in order to feel it. Do you know what I mean? Because that's how the government control that kind of what you think the world is. Because there's been just as many pictures of like Bondi Beach being completely snide out with people. So which one is it? It's probably somewhere right in the middle. But like but I agree with you in terms of like.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm not familiar with Australia, to be honest with you. I don't know if it's a one. I think I might be right in saying that it's one part or one state in Australia where they've gone batshit crazy. Is
I
that
think so,
where
yeah.
this, the New World Order woman
I think so, yeah. Is it
is?
the same region as Dan Andrews? Like, he's the kind of name that seems to be synonymous with all this stuff. But I think it is. I think it's the same region because I've got like I know some people who live out there, and when I look at their Instagram, it's like all on family days out and having a great time, and thinking that doesn't look like what I'm seeing. People getting booted in the face, for not wearing a mask. So I think it is. I'm like you. I don't really
Yeah,
pay that much attention to Australia, but I agree. I think if that started happening here, then bring it on because I think people need to see it to actually start getting the feelings that we have. Right? It's like that. Well, that's not happening to me. And I'm sure a lot of people,
yeah,
if they actually had to face down that situation, would
yeah.
probably react
And
similar to
also,
what we do.
I do think that the vaccine is backfiring anyway completely. I mean, I've seen my sister has been quite dramatically affected by the vaccine, and ignored all the advice I gave her and went ahead and took it. And she's now asking questions. It's a bit late now, but anyway, she's now asking the right questions, and she's a little bit skeptical about whether or not, it's really the panacea that everyone made out that it was going to be. And so I think with that, obviously they're trying to stave that off a little bit by offering boosters and boosters and yet more boosters. But I think at some stage with that, people have got to surely think, well, it's a load of shit and it's not working. So there's that side of things which will feed into it as well. But anyway, it still comes down to the fact that I think if we have these little groups, these little cells, and they are prepared to back people up and not just tweet, but actually turn up and help, then we could be onto something there.
No, I totally agree. And I think, again, having that is, again, thank you, Simon, for the name, Saul Alinsky, the Rules for Radicals, having something equivalent, for us, for that kind of liberty-minded, small cell type approach. Do you know what I mean? I think that's, if anyone is an author out there, then I would recommend that. Not only would it make you money, or you could distribute it free by PDF, but I think that would be a huge thing, a huge kind of thing for us to have to say, actually, when something happens, right? So it actually can take many forms. If it is the fallout from the vaccines, or if they do try and do the Australia thing here, we need something to point them to and say, you don't need a Loza Fox or any other kind of person. You just need to go and read this, and this is actually going to give you that framework. And again, back to that whole leaderless resistance concept. It's like, no, all you need to do is read this and go recruit 5 to 10 of your kind of friends who are willing and able to just influence that in your local area. And then that immediately becomes like spreads like a network effect, basically.
Somebody, I can't remember who it was now, got these postcards printed up of the Great Barrington Declaration? Have I got that right?
Yep.
Where we had an alternative scientific viewpoint that was put out there that was obviously marginalised heavily by the media and other scientists and so on, and they were made out to be batshit crazy. But actually, the points were put together, and someone got loads of them printed on postcards and asked various people to distribute these cards through their local community if they wanted to. So I emailed whoever it was, I can't remember who it is now, and got a whole box, and I got thousands of these postcards. Me and my son went round pretty much our entire neighbourhood and posted the card through the door.
Oh, wow.
And I left loads of the cards in llamas as well by the front door, so that when people were co-working, because we were still locked down at that stage, so that people could pick them up. So I think if there's a sense of growing frustration, I think maybe the timing was a bit off with those cards. It was a brilliant idea, but the timing was slightly off. And I think if the vaccine, we're starting to see the effects that, that the vaccine is not effective, basically, and people will start to feel a bit pissed off, I think now would be a good time to get more of those postcards and drop them off.
Yeah, totally. And also I was thinking about this as well in
Update
terms of
them with the vaccine effects. Yeah.
yeah, or even just generally, I mean that as well, but like in terms of like technology solutions, there must be a way of effectively not anonymously, but easily almost sending letters to everyone in your local area or posting them like nationwide to like thousands of people cheaply. And all you need to do, again, maybe it's part of that kind of central fund. And then some sort of technology solution says, right, here's a letter template, or make it an infographic, a very simple infographic that people can look at and think, oh, I've got some questions. Something that prompts them to ask
And
some questions, because
the
that was you need.
data, I mean, I've had a couple of arguments with people at work with regards to the vaccine. I've had a couple of customers come in, and they sometimes they come in, they're like, oh, I can't remember. They're like, oh, do you want me to wear a mask? No, I don't care. Oh, well, I'm double vaxxed. I immediately somebody says that to me. It's like, I don't care. I don't want to know. Thank you. I don't wish to know your personal medical status. And I think I was in a particularly foul mood last week when somebody said this, and he got quite defensive and said, "Oh, well, I'm just telling you because I think it's important that I let you know that I'm safe or something." And I said, "Well, sorry to tell you this, but I haven't had, since we're now in the business of divulging our personal medical information to one another, I haven't had the vaccine." And the guy who comes in quite regularly, this old guy, comes in with his dog, sat at the table and said to me, "Oh, Alison, you're joking. Why haven't you had the vaccine?" I was like, oh, God.
Yeah,
So I've got myself into
now.
a right, argument with him. And so I just thought, right. So I went through all of the reasons why I wouldn't take it and all of the side effects that I think it's, that are now we're hearing about, and asked him if he thinks that it's unreasonable, therefore, based on all of the facts that I'm giving him, that I would choose not to take it. And actually, he came round to my point of view within about half an hour. It's like, well, I didn't know any of this. I'd not heard of any of this. And I'm thinking, no. But hopefully, the more that people are aware and the more that this information comes out, and the more of, people in the world like my sister, who I'm sorry to say, make these huge blunders and take something without thinking about it and then regret it, the more we see this, and it can't be hidden, then I think there's going to be a little bit more momentum, I think, in that department.
There is, but one hurdle we've got to get past, though, is how they're now classifying someone as unvaccinated. And you're seeing this already, where actually, unless you've had the booster, I think this is more in America, or I think it was Israel. It's like unless you're had both jabs and the booster, you're classed as unvaccinated. So when you see people dying of all these people are unvaxxed, it's like, actually no, it's just the fact they keep moving the goalposts and what they consider to be fully vaccinated. And the
bloody hell, really? I missed that.
Yeah,
really?
And this is so they're messing around with numbers now, and this is how they're doing it. So basically, as you said, as soon as you move into the kind of autumn, winter, flu, cold months, you're going to see more. Well, I'm not going to say, I don't know, right? But if what the inventor of the technology is, if he's even half correct, he talks about like antibody dependency enhancement. People are going to start getting really sick who've had these injections because it's tinkering with their immune system. The spike protein is all over the body, which is going to start causing massive reactions. But if you've had one of them, 2 doses, not had the booster, they're just going to manifest that and say, oh, look at all this, this disease out of control. People are now dying again of COVID, but they're not going to tell you that actually it's because of that ADE or whatever it is. They're actually going to tell you, I know they were unvaxxed, because they'll just keep moving the goalposts that way, and that's how they're going to do it. And, so we've got to get through that hurdle. So I think it's got to be I agree with you in terms of the approach. I think doing something like that, all you've got to do is give them the hook and say, I'm going to show you something, and it needs to be enough to make at least 10 or 15% look, oh, I'm going to look at that a bit more. And then find all the information that they need to find. They don't need it all in one go. They very need to, especially, I mean, similar to your sister who's now getting curious, or the guy in the cafe who said, kind of came around to your position. A lot of these people are now going to be frightened when they hear this, because they think, oh shit, I've taken something, and there might be actually really something I need to be worried about here.
She and I don't see eye to eye on politics, and we fell out quite massively over Biden and that election. So we barely speak to each other. But she got in touch with me over the vaccine, because she knew that I'd been posting on my Instagram relentlessly about it, and asked me a few questions. And I said, why? I'm going to assume that therefore that you've taken this thing. And she said, yeah, she almost ended up in hospital. It was horrendous. And I just, every now and again, I get these little text, messages with this question, like, do you know if it does this? Or, so there is a degree of fear. And then I think the last message I got from her was, oh, well, I've done some more research now, which I thought was quite surprising. She said, I'm going to take the Moderna one.
Oh dear.
And I said, why would you do that? And so then I replied to her, and I gave her the information about the Moderna one. And I said, I need to remind you that, our father effectively died of a stroke. So you want to be very careful, and, like his father also. So you want to be very careful about something that could mess with could cause clots and that kind of thing. So I'd be very careful if I was you. Why do you want to take this? It's a flu. But I can only say so much. But it is interesting to see how things have shifted a little bit, because months ago she was taking the piss out of me and saying, oh well, we're from the generation who shoved a load of drugs down our throats, and we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know half of what was in this stuff, and now we're questioning what's in this vaccine. How ridiculous! And I'm thinking, to me, it's the other way around, actually.
Yeah, and also, and it was voluntary. That's the point.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not going to be forced into camps by not taking the ecstasy or whatever.
But this was before we got into the stage where anybody was going to be talking about making it mandatory. This was about a year ago, I think. But yeah, it's fascinating to see how people are, I think, starting to change their opinion about this vaccine, and they would change their opinion if they had the data. And I didn't realise that they're now changing the way the data is presented. That's really quite frightening.
It is, and that's but again, coming back to that Australia thing, I think that's what will usher it in, because effectively all they're going to do by doing that is turn public opinion even harsher against those who are choosing not to have it, because they'll just be blamed for it. So, oh, look, because of them, people are dying. Because of them, the restrictions are coming back. Do you know what I mean? That's how they'll do it. So, and this could be where, and then they'll cheer on, potentially the police or whoever to take a more extreme line with the unvaccinated, similar to Australia. But who knows? It could be just a general blanket, and then the police do it against everybody, which could start bringing people around to our way of thinking, which is what we want. And the thing again, I would. It's sometimes it needs to get that bad to actually start growing. As the comments on the screen, we need that us to start grow in number. And I think what we have to do is welcome the people into it.
No, I do think the us is slowly growing in number, and I think the more we can push this information out there about the vaccine injury and the negative effects of lockdown, and there was an interesting discussion on Fox News in America where they were discussing fascism. And that's the kind of discussion we need to be having over here. And whoever it was, this guy completely took, annihilated this woman who was saying, "Oh, don't be ridiculous, it's not fascism." And he pulled up the definition of fascism and said, "Well, so if this, isn't fascism, what's going on between if big pharma and government, then you tell me what the definition is," because he gave Mussolini's definition of corporations working with the state, and he said, so how can you say that it's not fascism what's happening with the vaccine if pharma is working with the state? We need to be having those kind of discussions, and they seem to be having them somewhat in America, but we don't seem to really be having those kind of really quite strident discussions here, because we've got such a crap media. I know that Peston, or whatever his name is, Robert Peston, had some issue with the vaccine and is now questioning it, which I think is quite ironic. But
it's only taken him 18 months.
Yeah, there needs to be more of that sort of mainstream questioning, but it's not going to come, though, is it? Really?
No, I agree with you. I don't think it is, or at least it won't be potent enough. It'll just be
Mm.
like pissing it on himself, saying something, and then he just gets overwhelmed with Piers Morgan, whoever will just speak
Yeah,
louder.
and it's not going to come with us all blathering on Twitter either. So the question is, I suppose, in terms of coming up with this insurrection, how do we get more people on board? How do we grow the numbers then if we've got no, if we don't have, if they're going to start manipulating the figures on the vaccine, if we've got no media voice, if we've got, if we're marginalised and pilloried, how do we grow? How do we grow numbers if we can't get out to people?
Well,
Because I don't think it's just it's got to come. It can't just come really from Third Wednesday and other little groups and networks like that. It needs to grow beyond that. It needs to be a wider segment of the population, and I just don't know how that's going to happen.
the way
That's
to do
where I'm
it, I think.
stuck.
Yeah, well, I think one way to think about this is if you think that before they kind of commandeered all our culture and all our institutions, we obviously had all the institutions working to protect liberty or to protect that kind of the British way of life and all that kind of stuff. And what they've done is kind of rot that central institution from the inside. So what we need to do is, I'm going to use a bit of Cliff High technology or terminology here, which is like we need to kind of I said I was going to quote him, then I've completely forgotten what he said. It's like we need to match them in the opposite way. So they are massively centralized, so we need to be massively decentralized. You know what I mean? And actually, we can just make them become irrelevant. We can never beat them at a centralized game because they've got everything. They've got the institutions, they've got the government, they've got everything. Everything is corrupt that you can look at. So what we need to do is make them irrelevant, and you can do that by having that decentralized approach. So yes, I agree with you. Like, these things are a start, but what we actually need to do is make sure that it's there. I think this is the important thing, and then naturally it will just be there and then soak up the numbers, and then it will just naturally become effectively a counteracting force, because it won't even be a counteracting force because if we've got the same numbers of them, in fact we've just got enough that we've just made them irrelevant. So all the things all the ways they can influence us, like through law enforcement, through the councils and all that kind of stuff, if we've got our own networks that are effectively taking care of ourselves, they just become irrelevant. What it does mean is, same with schools and stuff like that, but what it means is people are going to have to get way more involved in effectively civics or civic institutions than they are now. Like right now, you can pretty much ignore it. You pay money to it and it just kind of goes away and happens. That system, people need to know that that's dead now. Like if you want that system to continue, it's going to be you just effectively signing up for hell on earth. You need to actually now start taking on that responsibility that you've given away before and get involved.
Yeah. So it's going back to the point you made earlier, and we were both making about these networks actually coming up with being self-funding and being able to provide money and help and support that almost is, that outguns local government. Like if they're coming up with £8,000 to £15,000 worth of grants for businesses, then we almost need to be funding even more than that, so that these businesses can come to the network and say, okay, I'll stay open, but I need this money and it's there, and I need this legal support, and it's there.
And you can still do that in a centralized way, like doing
totally,
the money thing. You can definitely do that. I mean, again, this is what Dan and I talked about in terms of cryptocurrency. Like, in order to starve their system, you starve it for money. If you starve it of money, it will all die, because that's their biggest weakness. In fact, if you wanted a very quick way of bringing this whole thing to a head, everybody just needs to go in the bank and ask for everything they've got in the deposits out or in gold. You'll collapse the bank in 2 days. You'll collapse the whole economy in 2 days because there isn't money there. If you start a run on the bank, that's how you can very quickly end this. Do you know what I mean? So their weakness is money. So let's make it our strength. And the whole idea about being the opposite of what they are, like our strength, we can actually do something like that. And as you say, if we had whether it's cryptocurrency or some sort of mechanism that had that funding available, you could beat them that way, because you could just say, well, do you know what? I'm staying open. and my legal fees are covered, my income is covered, and but do you know what? I don't need that income because people have seen that I'm open and are just turning up, and you can't do anything about it. Or at least when you do come
Yeah.
about it, we're going to make such a nuisance of ourselves. You're just going to be turfed away and embarrassed, and
Yeah.
that's how you
Yeah, we
would do it. So
become ungovernable, basically. Yeah.
yeah, I think there's a comment early on that Simon, I think he was quoting Dan about start jamming the machine, and I think that's part of the
that's
and in terms of tactics and doing that again is what I wanted to cover in terms of like if you really wanted to be a right nuisance without actually harming people, you could start just like you can start deconstructing their infrastructure, like the CCTVs. You blind them because that's how they do. They just have bureaucrats sitting behind a camera, looking at everybody, reporting things, spying on people. Well, get rid of them. They're very delicate, these CCTVs. Do you know what I mean? Shine a few lasers into them and they're dead. That you have to replace them. So,
right.
you can get radio jammers. You can stop them talking. You can distract them. Just stupid things like, if you're doing something in one area, phone something in another area and pretend something's going on, or you just inundate them. There's ways of being a nuisance, as Simon was saying, jam the machine. You don't need to do this for very long before people start, like the actual police is like, you know what, I can't do my job. And whether they either refuse to do the job or they refuse to implement laws that are nonsensical, or they just can't be bothered because it's just so much resistance. It's like, we've got to do something. I don't think we'd have to do that kind of stuff for very long. So
no, I think that's it sounds like a plan.
It does, doesn't it? But this is what I wanted to get to. Do you know what I mean? It's like, what can we start to do? And I want to make this like a bit of a series. So I think I think there's still room for violence, of course. I think that'll be
absolutely
the fun aspect.
I think it will come to that in the end, especially if we go down the Australian route this winter. But yeah, I think that sounds like a plan. I actually feel quite encouraged by that.
Good. I think I do. I'm similar to you. I do kind of bounce between, oh God, this the whole thing's fucked, to actually feeling quite confident that, do you know what, I think we can actually do something like this. But I think we all need to, again, we don't need to act as a group.
I just really do think that we need to take some of this energy that's on Twitter and put it elsewhere. So this whole idea of these local networks and jamming the system and so on and so forth, all of that needs to be a little, not structured, but we just need to, there needs to be a little bit of planning around it, so that it goes beyond us just tweeting, and it goes beyond us all just meeting for consolation drinks and getting to know one another. I mean, that's a great start, but I think there needs to be a little bit more of a, okay, so there's potentially another lockdown around the corner, or the spectre of vaccine passports is still whether you like it or not, is still there. What can we do that's proactive in deterring that, or supporting businesses, or supporting anyone for that matter who's determined to go against the system? And if everybody could kindly stop saying hold the line. What bloody line are we holding? I mean, that was just, I think it was last week that was just driving me up the wall, and I had to walk away from Twitter because I just thought, what line do you all think you're holding on Twitter? It's like, come on.
I get this. I get the sentiment, but I agree.
We're not at that stage where we can say hold the line yet. Sorry, but we're not.
Nothing's on the line. That's the thing.
No,
like, there is no, at the moment, no one is on the line because it's theoretical. Like, just as you're saying, sending out tweets saying that doesn't really do anything. Okay, fine. It helps you identify people with a similar ideas to you and kind of motivations. Fine, but nothing for them is on the line. I say you've got to take the fight back to them, and we need to start organizing that. And I think, like I say, some things we've discussed tonight are the start. Do you know what I mean? It's not. We need to start actually making these things happen. So, like I say, let's start building out that message of like, build up your local networks. I'm sure between us we could write some sort of manual that says, do you know what, see if you were going to do some kind of phantom cell operation, here's what you would do. Here are the tactics that you would employ. As you say, you start jamming the machine, just so people have got something to read to say. So let's say they did black out social media. you could just pick something up and think, do you know what, I've got nothing to do today because I've now not got a job and I would just want to become a nuisance. Oh, I'm just going to look at this list. Yeah, fancy like doing that. Let's go out and do something. Do you know what I mean? And then that happening sporadically, unplanned, unconnected around the country starts becoming a problem. So that's a good thing. And then, like say, being able to sponge these people up who are coming over to our side and actually give them a landing, like a safe landing space that doesn't take them into like the extremes. Say, do you know what? No, it's fine. Yeah, okay, you've been vaccinated, no problem. We know you're angry, but do you know who the focus of your anger should be? It's these people, not the unvaxxed, not these other people over here. It's the people who are supposedly governing us. And I think see if we did something like that, then I think we're on. Like, I think we start being in a good place in my mind.
Yeah, and I do think that those little networks are there already. I think, the third Wednesday, you've got the various Telegram groups. There's a stand in the park where people are going along and doing these very soft little resistance things. So I think that there is a year, 18 months down the line, there are networks there, little networks and pockets of resistance. And I think now we need to be looking at how we, all of these things that you've just been mentioning, how we start to formulate those within these existing groups. So maybe that's a discussion for another time. But yeah, that I think that makes me feel a little bit more positive, and sort of a step closer to wielding my axe.
Good. Well, there'll be time and a place, so let's don't put it away. That's for sure.
No, I won't. God, no.
And is this going to convince you to stay on Twitter a bit longer?
Well, I've only got like 100 and so followers, but yeah,
it makes sense.
I'll probably take a little break from Twitter just because I've been going through the mill recently, and I don't want my sort of like dark, depressive side to sort of to come to the forefront on Twitter at the moment. But I think maybe I'm just exhausted. I have to be honest with you. I don't think I realised when I took on what I took on at the start of the year that it was going to be as demented and relentless as it has been. And it has been. And it kind of all came to a head recently. It's just like too much. And so then I end up sort of being a bit emotional and, dare I say it, a bit girly on Twitter. And I hate that. So I'm going to probably take a break, but I will stay on it.
Good.
And I will try and, I just think we need to have another discussion about how we kind of get this support network out there ahead of this potential lockdown in October half term. So we haven't got long.
No, what I'm going to do is...
But there are a couple of lawyer type people, and I've forgotten his name now on Twitter, who I think it might be worth speaking to see if we can't...
Is it Francis Hall?
Start putting together... Yes, that's the chap. Like a support network of a legal team, and how we could crowdfund or how we can put some money in place to support businesses that are going to try and head off this lockdown.
Yeah, I agree. I think because what I've done the last few times is just effectively write up a summary of what we talked about on the podcast, and I think that's a good start, is to kind of do that and then start acting on it and saying, as you say, start speaking to these people and start getting these things in place. And I think,
and also just knowing that there's a small army of men and women maybe who are prepared to to quite literally hold the line in some of these places. I think that would be useful to know as well.
Absolutely.
On a practical point of view.
Like basically who you're going to like arm to arm in the face of that baton, right? That's when you need to, that's when the holding the line becomes, I mean, you've done it. So kudos. Do you know what I mean? You can see you've done it.
I'd just like to know there are good men who'll stand arm in arm in front of me so that I can stand on a chair and give somebody a right earful before they get to close me down. And know that I've got, similar to when I was in Paris, that, if I get too stuck in, somebody will come and fish me out and go, okay, that's enough.
Right. We'll start that as a separate action, like a volunteer squad of something like that.
Thank you.
Right. Cool. Well, that's been great to chat to you. It's been a really good discussion.
And
So
you,
thank
it
you
was
for
a
your,
pleasure. Thank you.
yeah. And like I say, we'll do this again. And like I say, we'll put let's start putting those things into action. And then, yeah, I would like to focus more on maybe each one of those in a bit more detail, just to give some kind of
I
meat
think
to
so.
like how
We'll
people
need to
would get
going.
started.
We will need to get cracking though, because I can't believe October is less than a month away. So
It isn't, but even if, I think for me, the kind of primary one that we can get done really quickly is that fund. You can set up a GoFundMe in minutes.
yes,
You could just need someone who's publicly trusted to do that. And then, like I say, I'm sure we've network of
that's why I
networks,
was
we've got
thinking maybe
speak to
that
people.
Francis Hoare chap,
Yeah.
because I would trust him to like look after those funds and also to provide the right legal advice. There's that other woman on the Conservative, Conservative woman, Laura Perrins.
Yeah, she's been a trooper.
She was, I think she was a barrister or is a barrister.
I think so, yeah.
So there are people there that I think could be trusted, yeah.
Right, yeah. No, let's do it, because I agree. I think, see, that to me would be the quickest and easiest and most important thing we can actually do. Because imagine if by October we could have raised like even 100 grand for that fund.
Yeah.
Because not only is that a safety net for people like yourself or whoever wants to stay open to resist, it actually sends money itself sends a good message to the government, saying, oh shit, they've got this fighting fund. As they see that grow,
exactly.
you can forget YouGov polls and all that kind of stuff, right? If they can see that money grow into like hundreds of thousands, whatever, they know they've got a problem then, because money has its own attractive force. Do you know what I mean? Because as soon as people see that money there, other lawyers will start getting involved and thinking, oh shit, I want a piece of this. I'll quite happily stand and step into the fray. And then we do become a more recognizable and legal, opposition. So yeah, I agree. That sounds like a good start.
Okay.
Brilliant. Right. Well, that's been good.
Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
No problems. Well, enjoy your time off, and then thanks to everyone on the chat who's got involved. And if you're listening back in the future land, I hope you've enjoyed it. And we shall do this again. Cool. See you later.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.